Hello, Gino here, and you are listening to Otherworld Connections. We live in a critical time where now, more than ever, angels and fairies, hidden forces, are bursting at the seams of the veil to work with us. They want to see us change in order to save the world and live in service to others. So join me on a journey to empowerment and enlightenment with an angelic angle and a fairy focus, looking into ways to improve our current situation, morality, archetypes, solutions for self-healing, and spiritual sciences in light of theosophy and other occult traditions.
Hello, welcome back to Otherworld Connections. I'm your host Gino, and today's show we are talking about fairy tales, as per usual, and we are reading through Bernard Rogers' 2013 book, The Initiatory Path in Fairy Tales, The Alchemical Secrets of Mother Goose, and we are continuing to figure out, the word on the street from all the researchers of fairy tales. We're skipping a few because of, because I'm not going to waste your time with some of it. This one is looking at fairy tales in light of Freemasonry and Alchemy, which I assume Bernard Rogers is associated with Freemasonry and Alchemy, or studies both of them, and is pointing out the comparisons between common themes in the story, characters, the hero's journey, the plot devices, and so on and so forth, commonly found in fairy tales, and finding the associations between that and the great work through the eyes of Freemasonry and Alchemy. And we are trying to get to the what is the point as we continue to decode and find the point ourselves here on Otherworld Connections. So it's not just train spotting. Just a reminder, you can find a link to anything I read or refer to, which is going to be just this book. Okay, so it's this one. It's The Initiatory Path in Fairy Tales, The Alchemical Secrets of Mother Goose. Back in the day, fairy tales were, for a time, called Mother Goose stories. Dramatic pause? No, that was a brain freeze. And we are up to chapter 3, which is looking at the stages, and I believe he means by stages as in the scenes, the settings. And I think also really these are the plot devices, what moved the plot forward. And we're up to departure on a quest. Many fairy tales involve the protagonist departing on a quest. And when they depart on a quest, one thing that happens is a discovery of the world. And that's where we're up to now. So, let us begin. Discovery of the world. A story always tells why the hero has left home. Sometimes it is a question of going to see the world, which is often with no specific purpose, such as Bear John, one of the oldest fairy tales, probably the oldest fairy tale, when he leaves his country after becoming skilled in metallurgy and arming himself with an enormous iron cane. Or like the lad of the 500-pound cane. Oh, we've got canes showing up everywhere. Who had been found in the woods and was quite wicked. Or again like strong Hans, who, like the first two, came out of the wild forest armed with a staff. A more modest one that still weighed 60 pounds. That's heavy. All three had spent their earliest childhood in a cave or rock where they were imprisoned with their mothers, and all had fled in order to find their fathers. After which they had manufactured a formidable cane to set off on their adventure, or had received it as a gift. No one will contest the clearly sexual symbolism of these episodes. What? Hang on. Though it would be wise to not imprison it within the context of Freudian interpretation. Phew. The enormous cane, crafted or received as a gift after each character's reunion with his father, is obviously evocative of the potency, in every sense of the word, of its owner. Okay. The essential walking staff for the pilgrim, as well as for the craftsman of the Tour de France, while primarily a support for their journeys, can also occasionally serve as a weapon. The iron from which it is forged connects it with the god Mars, who conveys the universal and perpetual warrior ability that gives all beings, whether animate or not, from the primitive cell to the most complex, highly evolved individual, from the crystal to the galaxies, the strength to continuously resist the hostility of one's environment, as well as the power to draw nourishment from it. On all levels of existence, Mars fights tirelessly to pull order out of chaos. This is the role for this walking staff, which, in this sense, held vertically by the walker to gain support from the solid ground, is his axis of the world. There we go. The staff symbolizing the god Mars. While the young men in The Fisherman's Sons had no walking staffs, they were still nonetheless solidly equipped for travelling. 9 months before their birth, on the advice of a fish he had just caught, their father had given his wife 3 drops of blood from this generous beast to swallow. And he had given 3 drops to his mare and 3 drops to his dog. He had kept the gills and also had filled 3 vials with the fish's blood, as it had told him if misfortune were to befall one of his future children, the blood would start to boil. His wife gave birth to 3 boys, the mare to 3 fine colts, and the dog to 3 fine puppies, and 3 spears were found in place of the gills. It was on these 3 horses, accompanied by these 3 dogs, and armed with these 3 spears, that the 3 boys, half-bloods of the fish, who had thus equipped them, set off on adventure one day, each picking his own direction. In The Gold Children, the youngsters set off to see the world on 2 golden horses, born of a mare who, like them, had eaten 2 pieces of the golden fish caught by their father. Setting off to see, or to discover, the world is the most natural approach for an individual who wants to see the country and experience adventures that will open his mind and raise his level of existence. It is a rupture with habits and certitudes and an opening toward the unknown and all its possibilities. But the children in whose veins flows the blood of the fish, pulled from the depths of the waters, like those who own the large iron cane, a line uniting earth and sky, carry with them baggage that will inspire them to take far from common paths. Alchemists call their Mercury the traveller, and the iconography often depicts it as a pilgrim armed with a tall staff and a hat adorned with a scallop shell. This shell, come ashore from the ocean's depths, is akin to the one in which, at times beginning, Hesiod tells us Aphrodite, heaven's daughter, was born. They also speak of double Mercury, male and female, and in the story of the brother and sister, as if to explain this, it is specifically the brother and the sister who were mistreated by their stepmother, and who leave to travel the wide world together. In the white snake, it is a unique ability that the king's servant acquired before riding off on his horse when he ate a little piece of the secret dish reserved for his master's table. Hardly had he touched it with his tongue when he heard a strange murmur at the window of small, delicate voices, having tasted the snake, had given him the power to understand the language of the birds and other animals. In another tale, a prince's faithful servant strips away the cloak beneath which is hiding the chambermaid sent by the princess to the prince's bedside to steal the secret of the mystery from his dreams. In The Little Donkey, meanwhile, another king's son was quite fortunate to have had the opportunity to learn to play the lute and thereby gain a perfect understanding of music, which would offer him the greatest support during his travels. Oh, Sarah Cross in the chat says, Hi Sarah, how's it going? And I am picking out the masculine and feminine in the stuff that I'm reading. Interesting that he hasn't really pointed that out so much yet. He said the stuff was sexual, but I think there was a masculine aspect to all the symbolism of the staff, funnily enough. But there we go. So, these 3 tales are inspired by the WWB. Did I just read that? These 3 tales are obviously inspired by the art of Hermes. This is revealed first and foremost beyond any possible shadow of a doubt by the presence of certain expressions whose meaning we should now consider. The language of the birds, understood by the servant once he tasted the royal table's white snake, permits him to communicate with all nature's creatures. And I'm just like, I'm compelled by this. Obviously, I'm thinking that was a clever band name, right? White Snake. That is a cool band name. But hey, I am going to the Book of Symbolism. I just need to scratch this itch. We are going on. Come on, pull yourself together, Gino. We're looking at the snake in this Book of Symbolism. Which, oh great, doesn't want to load. It's a big book. This computer should be able to handle it. Here we go. Just needed a refresh. Okay, let's go to Snake. From Stephen Older's book, Dictionary. Comprehensive Symbolism Comprehensive Dictionary. Stephen Older with 2 R's at the end. I'm just going to Snake, because all roads usually lead to Rome, and we're just going to keep on top of that. We're just going to cross-reference every now and again, because we want the solution, the solutions that I come up with, or that we come up with on Otherworld Connections, to be, certified. Snake. S-N. Come on! Right. Snake, sea serpent, thanks. You can't click on that. You got to go all the way back to serpent. Okay, I'll just go all the way back to the serpent. S-E. Okay, it's going to be a big, it's going to be a massive explanation. Okay, serpent, evil, sin, energy, force, night, subterranean life. Fertility. There we go. Fertility. Serpent as fertility, and as we say on Otherworld Connections, that you could look at the serpent as evil, and you could recode the story based on eating the white snake as the evil. You could, and you would probably get something that meant that had a moral teaching similar or in line with, or a plural to, whatever the true intention of the actual author was to portray deep down inside the story. All right. Yes, so the language of the birds. Once he eats the white snake, contrary to ordinary idioms, which are shaped by the conventions necessary for social exchanges, the language of the birds gives life to sounds in the form of uttered speech that has completely freed itself from all rules of grammar. And that is why you see American English moving towards, in my opinion, green language, breaking free of the norms of English, and we see American English with slightly different spellings. It's a evolution towards green language. Perhaps, okay. So they can then assemble themselves in multiple ways, thereby revealing images that are as varied as they are beyond suspicion in the literal meaning of a phrase or word. This idiom is also called diplomatic language. It's diplomatic language because it makes it possible to give a double meaning, at the least, to the discourse. Right, R-I-G-H-T, right, R-I-T-E. Using the word right, R-I-T-E, in America, shops use R-I-T-E, right? I don't know, I'm not from America, but bake right. So it's like a bakery shop. It's called Bake Right because they do the baking right, but it's spelled R-I-T-E. This is what he's calling diplomatic language here. Knowledge of the language of the birds is necessary for anyone who wishes to understand anything in alchemical texts. But it is equally necessary for anyone seeking to receive the light from an initiatory order like Freemasonry, in which, without this language, no one would be able to grasp the shifting variety of values of the symbols in order to implement them. And you know, this is a tricky thing that I honestly think, going back in time, we find people that were much, 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 much smarter than us. And then at the same time, simple human endeavors, like basic human creative endeavors such as like art and, creative writing and prose, poetry, all these things, I think because they were smarter, they were held in higher regard. And I just think that, obviously looking back to the past is where we're really going to find the truth of things. It also, I think it's quite difficult. I think it's easy to go, oh, this meant that, and this meant that. But hey, I've got the mic, so I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it anyway. Oh, dear. So, if someone wants to figure things out from Freemasonry, they're saying that you wouldn't be able to understand Freemasonry without understanding. So Bernard Rogers is saying you wouldn't understand Freemasonry if you didn't understand the language of the birds. A dominant presence in the language of the birds, is, which is also called the language of the gods, the phonetic Kabbalah, the solar Kabbalah, and so on, at least on the plane of form, are word games, puns, and phonetic approximations, and on the plane of ideas, the principle of analogy. They are used in such a way that a group of sounds can simultaneously designate beyond any grammatical logic different actions and objects, while the same designated action or object can simultaneously belong to planes of existence that are supposedly quite distant from each other. Recall that the royal dish tasted by the curious servant was a snake, which was described as white. It is similar to another serpent, the most cunning of all the animals of the fields that Yahweh had made, in quotes, which a well-known traditional iconography wraps around the trunk of the tree of knowledge. According to the author of Genesis, it was the one responsible for the strange tribulations that befell our oldest relatives. And the eyes of both were opened. After they had heeded its advice and bitten into the apple, in our story it is not the eyes of the servant that opened once he tasted the snake, but his ears. In alchemical iconography, the snake depicts the prime matter, but it is also a symbol for Mercury. The name serpent has been given to Mercury because it runs like water and weaves like a snake. Dom Pernity explains, this serpent, which is black and stains the fingers when extracted from the mine, has become a gleaming white at the end of the labours of the first work. It then becomes the faithful servant who will henceforth never leave the artist, carrying him through all his metamorphoses, like the horse, the rider, and the Kabbalist. The language of the birds or phonetic Kabbalah and the faithful servant have a similar role in this art of music, in which verb and matter combine in the orchestration of this grand opera more commonly called the great work. And in fairy tales, when they depart for their quest, they might often be going in search of something or someone. The motive for departure is often more precise. A young man in The King of England and His Godson leaves in quest of his godfather, who is none other than the sovereign of that land of Angles. In The Birth of Truth, the son and daughter of a king whom their grandmother had tossed into the sea shortly after their birth are rescued by a couple of merchants. Once they have reached the right age and strength, they set off in search of their father, about whose name, home, and rank they know nothing. The same thing plays out in The Three Little Birds, for two young princes and their little sister, whom their jealous aunts had thrown into a river. The shepherd boy is seeking a master when he meets the king. Bear John, who refuses to get married until he had experienced fear, was sent to see his uncle, a village priest. In The Queen Bee, there are two princes who have set off in quest of adventure, which we've read recently on The Secret Kindergarten, radio show for kids, which you can get your kids to tune into Saturdays, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on Revolution Radio Studio A, where you get to hear fairy tales in their unexpunged form, exactly how they will always be meant to be read to young children, including the violence, including the whatever, because you notice there's actually nothing graphic in terms of there's no sexual content. There's marriage and and they had kids and stuff like that. Everything else is on the table. Everything else is on the table when it's a story, because kids aren't stupid, because they know it's a story and they like stories. All right. And as I always say, people are so hung up on trying to get their kid to act and learn and behave in a certain way that they think that everything, everything is an education, when really it's what you do. So if you see the value in fairy tales, and you know that fairy tales are, these talismans of truth, and that they're meant to be thriving in the community, thriving in the family, and part of a bonding and relationship building with your sons and daughters, then all of that is what's being transferred to the child, not the direct actions of the protagonist who goes out on an adventure. All right. Sometimes the tales feature girls who are looking for their brothers. In The 12 Brothers, the 13th child of a king wants to find her siblings, who had fled the death to which the announcement of her birth had condemned them. In The 7 Ravens, the 8th child in another family sets off in search of her brothers, who had been changed into ravens, as does another princess, who is looking for her 6 brothers, who had been changed into swans. In The Golden Apple, it is the daughter of a queen who is simply paying a visit to the king, her brother. Then there are the main characters who are going to serve the devil, like the young man ruined by gambling and the white cat, or the brave Benedict, whom his own father had sold to the demon in the wondrous wand. The valiant soldier of bare skin, discharged from the army and rejected by his brothers, set off on adventure and found himself in the centre of a wide heath. He had lost all hope and was seated beneath a grove of trees contemplating his fate when he saw a strange man standing before him, all dressed in green, who would have looked quite regal, but for his hideous cloven hoof. Dun dun dun. A similar adventure befell the one who would later be called the devil's sooty brother, who had been also dismissed from the army. He went into the forest where it was not long before he came across a little black man who was none other than the devil. On the plane of morality or sentiment, there is every reason to expect a wide gulf between the search for a relative or a teacher and that for the devil. The quest. However, the profound motivation of this step remains the same. The quest for a structuring agent, and despite his poor reputation, the devil in the stories contributes equally to the teaching and success of those who are clever enough to escape his grip. Over the course of the first works of operative alchemy, the famous ironclad knight is the artisan of the initial separation. For its part, Genesis tells us how the diabolos, literally the one who divides, who separates, who was responsible for humanity's great departure. Yeah, so searching for someone and encountering evil. Aha, this one. We do know this, those who listen to the fairy tales that I read. The pursuit of a bird. This is a very frequent theme. A young man who liked to walk in the woods one day encountered the green bird there. He set off in pursuit, but the bird hopped from one branch to the next and drew the young man deep into the forest. Mounted on a fox's back, the youngest son of a king is striving to catch the golden bird that had stolen his father's apples. In The Green Pigeon, a pigeon committed the same kind of crime. Every night it would make off with a farmer's large pears. The youngest son had caught sight of it in the moonlight at midnight, and the father and his 3 sons headed off toward the spot where they had seen it come down by the large oak with bonds. In The Magic Whistle, the 2 sons of a king have set out in search of a bird much loved by their father, who was feeding it one day when the door was open and it had flown away. The 2 sons of a dead man in the princess's slipper are praying at their father's grave when the younger one sees a bird flitting toward him. He tries to catch it, and the bird flies off to some distance. The young man sets off in pursuit and allows himself to be led so far that at the end of the day he finds himself in the middle of a large forest. I think a large forest is in like every single fairy tale, just about. In The 3 Feathers, it is not a bird, but 3 feathers that a king who feels his strength declining and is contemplating his imminent death has blown up into the air. The king's sons follow the feathers along their path, each in his own direction, in search of the most beautiful carpet. The one who finds it will be chosen as heir to the throne. Each picks his feather, and that of the youngest, known as the simpleton, spins about in the air before landing on the ground right next to him. The simpleton sat down next to his feather, feeling quite sad. Nothing seems to be less affected by the laws of gravity than a feather, like the bird that provided it. It is an image of the mind or spirit, a synonym in the alchemists' vocabulary for what they designated as the volatile, but also as the subtle. To pursue a bird, like following the capricious flight of a feather, can have several meanings at the same time. It is first and foremost indicative of freeing oneself from the fixed nature of the letter to join with the moving qualities of the spirit. This mental action can apply to a language, but also to a situation in life, a disposition, an encounter, an idea, or an object. The word symbol, through its Greek etymology, refers to the same dynamic. Whether it is a question of knocking at the door of the Masonic temple or of entering the arcanum of Hermes' art, the person in search of initiation has no chance of achieving it if he does not learn, first of all, to work on the level of the subtle. When a postulant presents himself in the lodge for the first time, he is plunged into total darkness, assailed from all sides by voices giving him notice that he must strip away the social mask he has constructed, and beneath which he has presented himself over the course of his life. Later he will be asked to strip away his metals. In the practice of alchemy, it is all the common metals that need to be rejected to the benefit of their spirit. The true subject of the art, it is only possible to extricate it by climbing back to the root of these metals, called the prime matter of the great work. To do this, it is necessary to heed the counsel of the famous text. You will separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, with care and wisdom. It is certainly not irrelevant that the bird encountered by the walker in the woods is green. Green brings to mind grass and foliage, the rivers whose moving mirror of wavelets lets a soft floor of algae to be seen. A green fruit is a promise of maturity, and the green of the leaves manifests their appetite for the red rays of light given off by the sun. The green bird combines with his quality of flight the evolutional faculty that it owes to the latent force for which it is the receptacle. In this respect, he is akin to the green lion of the alchemists, who give his name to their mercury when in the spring phase of their work it takes on a beautiful olive enamel colour. In the stories I just cited, the cause for the main character's departure is the pursuit of a being object whose nature is connected with the image of flying. In 5 of them there is a direct link between this object and the hero's father, and the Freudian school would undoubtedly have some reason to see this as an intervention of the superego or ego ideal in the main character. But in none of these stories do we encounter the famous policeman who should, from the depths of his awareness, inspire the hero to adopt a moral code for his integration into the social fabric. The paths of the tales run in other directions. Recall that one of the birds, which is all gold, stole the father's golden apples every night, and that a second bird pilfered the golden pears from another father. The third bird, who had a marvellous song, escaped through the door when the hero's father was giving it food, while another flitted over the tomb of a dead father, frustrated by a funeral mass. We should also recall that the 3 feathers were sent flying by the breath of the king, who at the end of his life and weakened by age wished for one of his sons to bring him back the most finely woven carpet. In all these stories, the objective is to recover something that the father has lost, something that has fled his domain, or something he desires, brought into it. He has promised his kingdom to the one who succeeds in this task. Well, it's a plot device, really. It's what moves the story. Yeah. What Freemasonry and alchemy are equally proposing to recover, each in its own way, is specifically the lost word. The first seeks this through the quest for the tomb of Master Hiram, and the second through the quest for the fire needed for the labours of the great work mentioned in this admission by an adept. Here we touch on the highest secret of the work, and we desire to keep our oath. It is Trevisan's verbum demison, the lost word of the medieval Freemasons, the one that all the Hermetic brotherhoods hoped to find, and whose search formed the purpose of their labours and the reason for their existence. So are they talking about the word no? What do you reckon? The lost word. The quest for water or a horse. Sometimes the hero is sent in search of water endowed with a particular property, but sometimes also a horse. The father in The Little Hunchback wanted water that rejuvenates, because the two older sons had failed the quest one after the other. The youngest son, whom the father detested because of his hunchback, set off in turn in search of this water. In the Water of Life, an old man revealed the existence of this life-giving water to an ailing king, which led to the youngest of three princes setting off in search of this remedy, after the desertion of his two brothers who had left before him. In a tale from Neve, a king is blinded by swallow excrement that fell into his eye while his youngest son was removing the fledglings from their nest. After some time had passed, the king told his sons, "If you would go seek for me the water from the Isle of Carcafulia, the one who brings it back to me shall have the crown. It is water that is necessary for the wavering shape of the newborn girl, who is scrawny and thin, and who will set off in search of her 7 brothers after they were transformed into 7 ravens of a shining black, who flew away in a flurry of wings." In The Poor Miller Boy and the Cat, the little servant, in order to get the mill of his master, who wants to retire and remain by the fireside, needs to bring him a splendid horse. He leaves with the miller's other 2 apprentices, his rivals, who abandon him in the middle of the night in a very dark cave. Here it is no longer a question of heroes chasing a bird to wherever the chance of its flight takes them. They head out with precise goals, to find and bring back water endowed with healing properties, or a good horse. Tangible experience and reason are in accord in testifying that a pitcher filled with water has little in common with a horse. So reason would be fully justified in refusing to treat the story of the poor miller boy as part of the same category as the other 4. However, while the justification for this approach cannot be found in everyday observation, Kabbalistic tradition can come to its defense. We can find evidence of this tradition at 87 Rue Ville du Temple in Paris, in the composition of the superb bas-relief executed by Robert Lalaurin in 1738. It is located above the door of the former stables of the Hotel de Rouen, which today houses the National Archives. It is visible on the eastern side of the second courtyard. The rays of dawn are lifting above scattered clouds from which the 4 horses of the sun mentioned by Ovid are emerging. These horses are Eu, Dawnsteed, Aethon, Scorcher, Phlegon, Blaze, and Pyroir, Fiery. In the center of the composition, one of the horses is drinking from a large scallop. There's that scallop shell again, held out by a man who, like the horses, is emerging from the mists scattered by the sunrise. The horse incorporates this water, which is commingled with it, in a lone, single body. The mare, a vehicle of the sun, like the solar Kabbalah that transports sounds, is revealed as identical to the fire water held in the shell, symbol of the Mercury that an operative alchemy carries the invisible sulfur in its belly. Water that rejuvenates, water of life, water from the Isle of Kakafuala that restores sight to the blind, baptismal water that confers spiritual life, and all those waters have a function similar to that of the very splendid horse, who in other tales carries his rider from dark caverns into the world of celestial constellations. The search for such a horse, as the one for such water, is the quest for the remedy that will free the individual from his current state of existence and open to him access to the limitless paths of being. Alright, that was pretty hectic. Winning a princess. Once upon a time there were 3 brothers. The youngest was a little stupid, like me. Now at this time there was a princess who was ready to wed, but whose hand was not easy to win, because it required, the tale says, that a young man must know the answers to her questions. In The Princess and the 3 Brothers, the 2 older brothers set off to try their chances, followed by their simple-minded brother, whom they had forbidden from accompanying them. That's probably, yes, the youngest son. All right. There was, in these bygone days, an old queen who was a witch, and whose daughter was the most beautiful creature under the sun. The tale of the 6 servants assures us. But every time a suitor came, she informed him that he who wished to obtain her daughter would have to pass a test or else die. And all those who tried had their heads cut off. However, a lot of heads roll in these fairy tales. A lot of heads roll. I don't know if he's going to mention that. However, a prince who had heard of the extraordinary beauty of this princess begged his father to give him permission to go seek her hand. "Never," responded the king, fearing for the life of his heir. But so sick with love for this princess that he could die, the young gallant set off once he managed to gain his father's consent. The princess in The Sea Hare was so haughty that she wished to be subject to no one and to rule alone. She therefore caused it to be proclaimed that she would only wed the one who would conceal himself from her so well that she would be unable to find him. However, whoever accepted this challenge and failed would have his head cut off and mounted on a stake in front of her palace. In the highest room of her castle she had 12 magic windows that allowed her to see everything in the wide world, and 97 heads planted on an equal number of stakes formed a sinister hedge in front of the castle gate. The princess had been delighted at the prospect of thereby remaining single her entire life when 3 new suitors, 3 brothers, came before her to attempt the trial. Another king's daughter, this one the victim of enchantment and a captive in the castle of the Golden Sun, was waiting for a champion to deliver her. Already 23 young men had found a miserable death there, and as only 24 could accept this challenge, only 1 more was left to free her. Thus begins the tale of the Crystal Ball, which I have put onto YouTube with some images, with the attempt of making it look like a storybook for kids, which is a big compromise from all our studies of why the TV is bad. But the Crystal Ball is a story that needs to be kept alive, in which the son of an enchantress who had a heart that did not know fear, set off in search of this castle of the Golden Sun. An old king, feeling the end of his life was imminent, had summoned his favourite servant, Trusty John, to his bedside to request that he take great care of his son, still of that tender age when he does not know how to behave in heed of his reason. And he gave him this express command: After my death, show him the entire castle, all its rooms and halls and vaults, and the treasures they hold. But the last chamber at the end of the long hall you shall not show him, for within is the portrait of the Princess of the Golden Dome. If he sees this picture, he will immediately fall desperately in love with her and fall into a swoon, and thereupon expose himself to great perils for her sake. You must spare him this. But after the king's death, what would inevitably occurred. The prince insisted so strongly that the faithful servant was soon forced to open the forbidden door, and his eyes had no sooner caressed the dazzling image of the beautiful princess when he fell into a swoon, and his entire body lay stretched out on the ground, for she was truly superb and gleaming with gold and precious stones, restored to consciousness by a good glass of wine, which helped him recover his senses. The new king asked the identity of the woman with whom he had become so desperately smitten. He then gave orders for a long maritime voyage for the purpose of meeting her. He departed without delay, accompanied by John, both disguised as merchants. In his ship he brought 5 tons of magnificent gold objects skillfully wrought by his kingdom's goldsmiths. In the gnome, the 3 princesses being sought by the 3 hunters had been swallowed up by the ground of the palace garden immediately after eating a beautiful red apple from the tree that their father, the king, loved so dearly. He had sworn that any who took one of its fruits would be sent 100 fathoms underground. "Oh, dear sisters," said the youngest after taking a bite, "taste this." "Never have I tasted anything so good." Her 2 sisters bit into the apple, and all 3 were buried so deeply in the earth they could no longer even hear the cock crow. Although far from the light of the sun, each of the princesses spent her time picking lice from the heads of a dragon while their father searched for them throughout the kingdom. He promised that whoever returned all 3 safe and sound would have the hand of the one of his choice. And we read The Gnome on Saturday on the Secret Kindergarten radio show for kids. It was in order to rid himself of Leopold that his father, wary of this rascal's violent actions, abandoned him at the end of a road. The boy made his way to a village where he found everyone in tears. "What do these imbeciles have to cry about?" he guffawed. He was told that a princess was soon to be eaten by a beast with 7 heads. "Is that all?" said Leopold. The people asked each other, "Isn't that bad egg, Leopold?" He continued on his way and came across an old woman. "Where are you going, my friend?" Well, we'll find out where he's going on the next one. We just raced up to the end of the hour, top of the hour. Thanks so much for tuning in. We're going to continue the Initiatory Path in Fairy Tales by Bernard Roger next week, so stay tuned. Thanks so much. Love you guys. See you at the next one.